Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking into the sordid past of Coco Chanel and her days as a Nazi spy. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Coco Chanel was a spy for the Nazi Party, and all of this was able to be kept secret for decades until recent years. I was personally unaware of this until I was talking to my friend about the Murphy Ranch video I did, which discussed a Nazi sympathizer group here in America, and she casually just mentioned that Coco Chanel was also a Nazi. This is actually going to be my first video where I don't have a physical location to go to, but I need to give my car a break anyways. I mean, these gas prices are absolutely insane. But before we jump into today's series of events, I do want to mention that if you're interested in things like true crime, crazy historical events like today's video, ghost phenomena, and things of that sort, then you have stumbled on the right channel, because that's all I'm going to be talking about every single week, and I'm also going to be traveling to and exploring most of the locations I talk about, so definitely hit that subscribe button, and also hit that bell icon if you want to stay tuned for more adventures. Alright, let's go ahead and dive into today's story. Coco Chanel is probably one of the most influential women when it comes to women's fashion in the 20th century, changing women's style of the time from frumpy Victorian gowns, and introducing fashionable pieces such as the little black dress, and, of course, who could forget her most popular fragrance line, Chanel No. 5? But in recent years, it has slowly become widespread knowledge that her endeavors didn't end at women's fashion, and has painted a very different picture of the Coco Chanel we thought we knew. Coco's birth name was Gabrielle Chanel, and she was born in 1883 in the Loire Valley of western France, to a poverty-stricken family. Her mother, who was a laundrywoman, died when Coco was just 11 years old, and her father, who was an itinerant laborer, which is just someone who works in a certain place for a short period of time, such as a farmhand during picking seasons. He sent Gabrielle and her two sisters away to a Catholic convent orphanage, where they all three remained until their early teen years, where they eventually moved on to a Catholic boarding house for girls. During this time as well, the Catholic Church was steeped with anti-Semitic beliefs, and it instilled these beliefs and fears into the girls at a very young age. In her 20s, Chanel found work as a seamstress, and in the evenings, or whenever she had a spare moment, she would also sing at a cafe which was frequented by men serving in the military. And it was actually at this cafe that she got her nickname Coco, which is a name taken from one of her most popular songs that she'd sing. And Coco is also shorthand for the French word coquette, which refers to a well-kept woman. And this name definitely fit her because she was strikingly beautiful, smart, and very witty. Throughout her 30s and 40s, Chanel went from romance to romance, living with different wealthy men with high social rankings, adopting fancy tastes and habits, and ultimately she was introduced to a lot of the elite people of that time. In 1923, the British socialite Vera Bate introduced Coco to a new stage, the royal family. And shortly after meeting Edward, the Prince of Wales, a 10-year romance kicked off between the two, which was filled with passion and a newfound market in England for her growing empire. However, once things ended between the two of them, she headed back to Paris to continue operations of her business, which is where she was in the spring of 1940 when the Germans invaded France. Chanel fled to a city south of Paris, and she was going to stay with her nephew's family, but upon her arrival she learned that her nephew Andre, who was a soldier in the French army, had been captured by German forces. And after hearing this, Coco quickly returned back to Paris to use the connections that she had made in order to free her nephew. Around the same time, Chanel was in the middle of a business dispute with the directors of Parfum Chanel, which was the company that owned her fragrance such as Chanel No. 5, and they were Jewish. Chanel used her Aryan status in the eyes of the Germans to try to gain control of the company, and Aryan status is basically just what Germans considered pure lineage, and Chanel thought that if she played this card, she could gain sole control of the company, and although that didn't happen, instead the owners were able to negotiate a far more profitable arrangement, which essentially made her one of the most wealthiest women following the end of the war. In 1941, Chanel was now 57 years old. She had begun a relationship with Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage, who was a Gestapo spy for the Abwehr, which was a Nazi intelligence organization. And this ultimately meant that whenever Chanel and Dinklage would spend time together, she'd often also be spending time with some powerful Nazis, including Hitler himself. Later in the year, the Abwehr caught wind of Chanel's nephew's situation, and eagerly they reached out to her to strike a deal. the release of Andre, in the exchange of communications from some of Chanel's allied connections. And with Dinklage's help, Chanel strike the deal with the Abwehr. Chanel would go on multiple missions for the Germans, even adopting the spy name Westminster, which was derived from one of her past flings with the Duke of Westminster, who was well known to have anti-Semitic beliefs. However, much of her actions on these missions, aside from using her social status to gain communications, are still pretty much unknown to this day. By the winter of 1941, Chanel had learned that the Nazis held up their side of the bargain and released Andre, returning him home safely. However, this didn't stop Chanel from keeping close ties with the Nazis and continuing to run covert missions for them. A few years later, in the winter of 1943, the Allied forces were closing in on Hitler, and known collaborators were beginning to be captured and punished. Nazi leaders told Dinklage that it was time for him to leave Paris and Chanel behind, but Chanel, who couldn't bear being in Paris by herself, concocted a new plan, one that leveraged her ties with socialite Vera Bate, specifically a connection that she had with someone named Winston Churchill, who might sound familiar. Chanel believed that she could use this connection to persuade the Nazis that herself and Dinklage had the context that they needed in order to arrange a deal with Britain instead. However, this did not go according to plan, due to Miss Bate confessing her own part as a German conspirator shortly before the plan could even be enacted, and she also named Chanel as an informer in the process. Shortly after Paris was liberated from the Nazis in August of 1944, the French government had arrested Chanel, but with limited evidence, she was released very quickly, and some historians believe this was due to her ties with Churchill, which helped facilitate a quick release, although there isn't necessarily proof of this happening. One theory is that Chanel leveraged her knowledge that Churchill also conspired with the Germans by secretly paying them off to protect the Duke of Windsor's property in Paris. So basically, in layman's terms, Chanel was believed to have knowledge that Churchill paid off the Germans to help her ex-boyfriend keep his property in Paris, and because she knew all of this, it was in Churchill's best interest to help her get out of trouble. But at the end of the day, this is just all hearsay. The interrogation between Chanel and the French government was never made public, mainly due to the fact that there was a lack of interest in reopening such a complicated case. For decades, her ties with the Nazis were kept hidden in the archives of different nations, only to be released in recent years and made even more popular with books such as Hal Vaughn's book, Chanel Sleeping with the Enemy, which uses certain documents to help trace the path of how Coco Chanel finally ended up becoming a Nazi spy. After the war, many other female conspirators that were fully prosecuted as horizontal collaborators, unlike Chanel, were forced to do things such as shave their heads in a campaign of punishment and humiliation. Instead, Chanel went back to living her life how she did before the war, living lavishly and dressing the rich and famous with her luxurious brand. She spent her remaining years without prosecution or even a single mention of her sordid dealings with Dinklage and her collaborations with the German Abwehr. She died years later in the Ritz Hotel in Paris, where she resided for the majority of her career on January 10, 1971, at the age of 87. Her fashion sense lives on today with her brand still thriving, many still unaware, however, of just how enthusiastic Coco Chanel was to work alongside one of the most sinister regimes in history. I don't know if you knew any of this before clicking on today's video, but I was personally absolutely blown away when I was reading all of it. It's honestly sad to learn this detail about her, though, because she was such an influential woman who can be thanked for bringing fashion to where it has evolved today. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything can excuse a person for being so hateful towards another human being. Not to say that she hated anyone for certain, but she definitely worked for people that carried so much hate towards another human being. Someone who was killing thousands of people openly, and she ultimately did nothing to help the situation for the better. If you did learn something new today, go ahead and put a like down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you are interested in learning about some of the lesser known true crime stories and historical events. And definitely hit that bell icon so you can get notified when I do make a post. Especially right now with my channel being so new, YouTube isn't really recommending my videos quite yet, so hitting that bell icon really helps keep you in the loop when I do make a post. And honestly, any interaction that you do with this video will help get my video on those recommended pages. But other than that, I do really appreciate all of your support, And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next week.